Hello everyone. Today we will be studying Sonnet 116 by William Shakespeare, which is usually titled The Marriage of True Minds. Before we begin to study and explain the sonnet, let us together read the poem. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever-fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose words unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. That was Sonnet 116 by William Shakespeare, which starts out, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. The sonnet was a form which was begun in the 13th century and which achieved fame and recognition via the work of Petrarch, who fixed the form of the 14-line sonnet into an octave and a sestet. The octave or the octet consists of 8 lines, which is the first part of the sonnet, and the sestet consists of 6 lines, which is the second part of the sonnet. Usually the rhyme scheme is A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E. In addition, it was part of the conventions of the sonnet that the first 8 lines, the octave, used to pose a problem, and the sestet used to give some solution to this problem. Other conventions which dictated the use of the sonnet as a form in literature in Petrarch's time and Petrarch's usage meant that the sonnet was usually a love poem written to a beautiful lady who was seen as unattainable and usually spoke of unrequited love. The sonnet was brought to England in the 15th and 16th centuries by Sir Thomas Wyatt and the Earl of Surrey. The form of the sonnet changed once it came to England. Where earlier it was divided into an octave and a sestet, the English sonnet, as it was initially called, consisted of 3 quatrains and a couplet. A quatrain is a stanza form consisting of 4 lines, and the couplet, of course, consists of 2 lines. The English sonnet later came to be known as the Shakespearean sonnet because its greatest practitioner was William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, dramatist and poet, lived and worked in the 16th and the 17th centuries in England. Primarily known, of course, as a dramatist, he wrote 38 plays and they have achieved for him international fame, recognition, acclaim. William Shakespeare also wrote poetry, a sequence of sonnets comprising of 154 sonnets, longer poems such as Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece, and also some poems of which the authorship is disputed. The exact date when Shakespeare wrote the sonnet sequence is not very clear. In fact, it has never been proved as to when exactly it might have been written. Internal evidence points to the fact that they must have been written sometime during the 1590s. Speculation is that when the theatres were closed and there was no work to be available for Shakespeare as writing dramas, that is when he might have written the sonnet sequence. However, they were first published as a volume of poetry in 1609. When they were published, they were dedicated to a Master W.H. and they show a certain pattern. It is interesting to note that sonnets 1 to 126 deal with an unnamed young man. Usually, critical speculation says that this young man might have been the Master W.H. of the dedication. He is also, of course, called a fair youth. It is interesting to know that some of these sonnets, from sonnets 1 to 126, are about friendship, others are about love. Some of them advise the young man to get married so that he will leave copies of himself, because otherwise beauty such as his would be lost to the world. And the whole thing is framed in a verse of homosexual love, which is of course forbidden during Shakespeare's time, and therefore then the fact that he wrote 126 sonnets of love to a young man becomes a rather problematic concern. The remaining sonnets, 127 to 154, are about a dark lady. Most speculation is that this dark lady must have been Shakespeare's mistress, and it is again unclear as to who exactly this was. But put together, this sonnet sequence, 1 to 154, is all to do with the nature of love. In this module, we will summarize the poem and see exactly what it does. Sonnet 116 is usually held to be one of the best and most perfect evocations of love poetry. Instead of speaking to a person, this sonnet is a generalization about what exactly love is or what love is not, how love should be and how love should not be. In the first quatrain, the speaker declares that he ought not to obstruct or stand in the way of real love. Then, of course, he says that there can be no obstruction. Nobody can stand in the way of what is, for him, true love. In the second quatrain, he presents us with a couple of extended metaphors. One, of course, he compares love to a lighthouse, and he compares it to the pole star, both of which are useful in finding direction. They are useful to sailors, to travelers, and they help people to find their way in days before we had GPS and when people were not very sure of the maps of the world. Lighthouses and the pole star were ways in which you could find your way in an uncharted world. He claims, the poet, that love, if it is really true love, can in a similar fashion provide guidance to any traveler who is walking through this world. In the last quatrain, Shakespeare meditates upon the true nature and the relationship between love and time. Usually, it is believed that time in some ways eradicates love, but Shakespeare says that time can in no way change love if it is really so. Thus, he says that love cannot be constrained by time. It will outlast time even to the end of time itself. So, even though time might come to an end, love will continue. The people who are in love, though they might grow old, love itself will remain fresh and blooming. And then, of course, there is the concluding couplet, where Shakespeare kind of issues a challenge to the people. And he says that if what he has written so far in the three quatrains is not true, then it has to be said that no man can ever have loved, nor can there have been any writing. It is in some ways a final stroke, because what he is saying there is that if the nature of what he has said is proved to be untrue, then he himself as a writer has failed and love itself has failed, because then there can have been no love ever in the world. Shakespeare begins the sonnet with, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment." When he starts with this one line, he is actually speaking to somebody. So he's giving us a situation in which there is a speaker and there is an audience for that speaker. We have to, of course, assume that who is this narrator speaking to, or who is the speaker in the poem speaking to. What we can understand from the position of the sonnet as the 116th sonnet in the sequence is that most likely it is an older man who is speaking to a younger man. This is because we assume also that the 116th sonnet belonging to the first part of the sonnet sequence, sonnets 1 to 126, is addressed to the young man. So therefore then what we can say is that the speaker is maybe the poet himself, but an older man who is addressing a young man and trying to teach him what exactly love is all about. When he starts out with, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment," he is using a phrase which comes from the Christian marriage service. In the Christian marriage service, there is a part wherein the priest says to the people who are watching the marriage service that if anyone knows of any just impediment why this marriage should not take place, then they should speak up now or forever hold their peace. It is that part that is referred to when he says, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediment," that he should not put up an The second quatrain begins with an exclamation, as if the speaker is responding to what he has just said. He starts out by saying, "Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark. So it is not fickle, it is not inconstant. Instead, what is it? It is an ever fixed mark." Now, the mark in Shakespeare's time was said to be any major landmark which travelers or sailors could see from a distance and which would then help them to know where exactly they were when they were traveling. So when he says it is an ever fixed mark, he is referring to something that cannot change because it has stood and will continue to stand as a guiding light for travelers and for sailors especially. In today's parlance, we might say that it is like a lighthouse, which is one high up, which remains constant, which puts out a light when there is a storm, so that sailors will know that there are rough seas ahead or that there are rough rocks ahead. He compares love, therefore, then to a lighthouse or any such beacon which was used as a landmark by sailors and mariners. When he says that it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken, he is also referring to the fact that love, therefore, is at a height from what is generally life. So there might be tempests in real life, there might be upheavals in the lives of the lovers, but at the same time, the love that they have will remain above and beyond all this. So they will not be affected, their love will not be affected, their lives might be affected by the tempests that will be raging around them, but their love will go on for eternity. Then of course he moves on to the next one. The next metaphor which he uses is to claim that love is like a star. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. It's an interesting metaphor to use because when he says it is the star to every wandering bark, he is referring, of course, to the pole star. Now, during this period, which is a period of great marine exploration in England, when Shakespeare is writing in the 1590s, the pole star was of extraordinary significance because it was used to guide sailors. It was the one fixed point that they had in the skies, according to which they could navigate the seas which were then unknown to them. Now, the height of the star had been measured, but its worth was unknown, as in it could not be mapped, it could not be charted. So when he says that love is like the star to every wandering bark, he is giving us two parts to this. One, that it is a star which is fixed in the skies and which will provide direction, but it is also for every wandering bark. A bark over here is referring to a boat, a small boat maybe, which is lost and which is aimless and wandering around. Thus then, love can be something that helps us to get back on course. If we have lost our way, then love will help us to find our way once again. And of course, he says that he extends the metaphor by saying that though love is fixed, unchanging, its worth is unknown. This refers, like I was saying, to the fact that during this time, marine navigation depended upon the pole star to a very great extent. Though they could not be sure what exactly a star was, they nonetheless had quadrants which measured the distance from the stars. And so, when the speaker compares love to the North Star, he says that it is impossible to know what love is in practical, empirical, verifiable terms. But its worth is immense because it provides guidance to those who are lost and it helps them to find their way in life. Thus, over here in this quatrain, which we have just discussed, what he has done is he has shown us what love is. It is a guiding light. Whether it is in the form of a star or in the form of a lighthouse, it is a guiding light for every individual who is wandering through life. Quatrain 3 begins with the idea that love's not time's fool. That's the phrase with which it starts, the third quatrain of Sonnet 116. And when we look at that one line, love's not time's fool, we are immediately, of course, reminded of a character from Shakespeare's time and from many of Shakespeare's plays, the fool. The fool who is somebody who, of course, provides entertainment, but who is also somebody who speaks words of wisdom. So when Shakespeare writes over here in this sonnet that love is not time's fool, he is telling us that time is, one, not the ruling monarch, and two, love is not a fool to provide entertainment. What he is instead, of course, telling us is that though rosy lips and cheeks might come within the compass of time, time cannot conquer love. This flies in the face of popular wisdom, which says that all things die, even love dies with time. Here Shakespeare turns it around and says that true love is such that it will conquer time itself. Time cannot in any way alter real love. There is, of course, a problem with this entire sonnet because we are being told what is real love. Real love is something which cannot be measured, which cannot be defined, which cannot in any ways be verified empirically, and yet its attributes will tell us whether it is real or not. So in this quatrain of the sonnet, we are then discussing the effect that time has on love, or the lack of effect that time has on love. Time in no way can alter love. To present this idea, we are told first of all that love is not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. It's an interesting notion because here time is being personified for us. Time is being presented to us as a figure of a person who carries a sickle, so maybe a mower. And that mower is mowing down people, is mowing down things, is eliminating and finishing off what might be love or what might be human beings who are in love. And then Shakespeare says that though rosy lips and cheeks, so the youthfulness and the freshness of the people, the young lovers, that might fade, but there is no way that the love itself can change. Thus, when he says that rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come, he's telling us the arc of what time can conquer. So time here is somebody who holds a sickle and cuts down people like grass is cut down in wide sweeping motions. But those wide sweeping motions might eliminate rosy lips and cheeks. Youth, the rosy lips and cheeks of youth might change, but love itself will not change. So lovers might be grass-like, they might be fragile, their appearances might be transitory, so they might then at one point they might have rosy lips and cheeks, at another point they may not have rosy lips, but their love will remain unchanging. Time cannot in any way alter that. He goes on to say that love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. Interesting, because here, first of all, if love is shown to us as somebody who cuts down things, as a mower who cuts down grass, if in the first part he is shown as a mower who cuts down grass and who cuts down youth, then in the second part we are told that love cannot alter because time has only brief hours and weeks. Actually, when we think about it, we think of time as something which is everlasting. Time goes on, and time is not seen as something which is just brief hours and weeks. So when Shakespeare writes that time with brief hours and weeks cannot alter love, he is in some ways minimizing the effect that time can have on love itself. That love cannot be changed because time has at its command only a few hours, a few weeks. That time therefore then is seen as being of little significance in the way of true love. Love will carry on in spite of time. And then the last line of the quatrain, which is of course an important line, wherein he says that love bears it out even to the edge of doom, which is to say that doom, eternity, judgment day, which is of course a Christian concept, that there will be a time when time itself will come to an end and all things will be judged. He says that love will continue even to that point. Time will end, but love will continue. It is also, if you wish, a Christian concept because love is the only thing that is seen as conquering time itself. So when he says the edge of doom, he is referring to Judgment Day, the day when the whole world comes to an end. He is referring to a series of things, and he says that time itself will end, but love will not. We conclude the poem here with a couplet wherein he says, "If this be error and upon me proved, I never writ nor no man ever loved. Having said what love is not, that time cannot conquer love, that love will provide guidance," Shakespeare at the end comes back to the idea that if what he has written in this sonnet in the 3 preceding quatrains is proved to be false, then what he says is that there can be no love ever in this world, and that he himself has never written anything in this world. It is a challenge which he issues at the end of this sonnet, wherein he says that all his writing is about this idea of love, and if this idea of love is proved to be wrong, then everything that he has done is of no worth, is valueless in his life. Thus, reading Sonnet 116 of William Shakespeare, we have come to know what love is and what love is not. Love is seen as something which can guide human beings through every tempest, through every storm that life can bring its way. Love is also something that cannot be altered by time. So time might continue, time might end, but love will always continue. And in the end, when Shakespeare says that if this is not true love that he has defined and that he never wrote, then we in the 20th century are being challenged by Shakespeare, because given the fact that we recognize Shakespeare as one of the greatest of all dramatists and poets, this challenge means that nothing of his has any value beside this definition of true love.